time today. Again, this is Betsy Scott. I'm one of the executive directors of the Housing Innovation Alliance. Thank you for joining us today. I'm in charge of programming and engagement. And in essence, this call today is a kind of a webinar. If you've been to one of our live events, our live roundtable events, we have great chats when we get some really smart people around a table talking about a subject. So we wanted to take what we do live and do a better job of bringing that into a virtual environment and build on some of the conversations we've been having. So today's focus is on creating a roadmap for adopting BIM within your business. Why are we here today? Why are we talking about this subject? As an organization, we're focused on driving innovation in housing. We think that there's never been a better time for that in the industry and a greater need for that in the industry. And specifically, the areas kind of, if you look at what a home building company might look like and what they should focus on from an innovation perspective, when we talk about BIM today, we're really dealing with two of those areas. Integrated design and engineering, as well as production and productivity. We believe that if we look at being more aggressive in using technology, business systems, and processes within building organizations, that we can improve production and productivity, whether you're building on-site, traditional stick build, or whether you're building in a factory. So we wanted to dig into this more deeply, mainly because this was one of the subjects that we touched on a bit earlier this year at the summit that we held in New Orleans. That's when we talk about that whole big vision of what that company looks like. We delved a little bit deeper into this area, and there was a lot of interest and a lot of questions that came out of those discussions around the table. And really what you're seeing here is a word cloud of kind of how people were reacting to the topic. I think people see on the housing side, which hasn't adopted BIM very much to date, percentage-wise, in comparison to commercial construction, people are seeing the opportunities for value, like in productivity and in quality, but they're questioning whether, who makes that investment, and they're having some challenges kind of wrapping their head around bringing those systems to play in their businesses. So this isn't going to be the end-all, be-all of this discussion, but we wanted to move the ball forward a little bit on this front today. As a group, we're all about getting smarter about innovation in housing. So as I said, this isn't the end of the journey. This is a part of the journey. But we wanted to really take a handful of folks as kind of a panel for today to talk about and see if we can start addressing some of those questions further. And before we introduce each of those, speakers that we've got on the panel today, I just wanted to take a moment to thank our partners for their support. Really, these are companies that underwrite the agenda of the Alliance kind of in a PBS fashion, and you're actually going to hear from some of them today because they happen to be experts in this area that we're talking about. But they help make this type of programming possible. So just wanted to give a shout out to those folks, and many of you are on the phone, and thank you so much for your support in making events like this possible. So I'm going to try and keep everybody muted that I can. If you've joined and you haven't muted yourself, if you wouldn't mind doing so just in case I miss you, that would be greatly appreciated. But today, like when we create those tables, those think tank tables at events, we like to look at the makeup of who's sitting at that table so it becomes more of a dynamic conversation with different perspectives. So we've got really what I would call three different types of people participating today. The first of which is a super user. So these are folks who are actually using the technology themselves within their businesses. The second group is really kind of an integrator. So those are folks who have access to multiple business technology solutions. They have some intellect and are able to kind of help builders and architects plan what they're trying to do within their business and then define what are those technical systems that would help them achieve their business goals. So that's the second group. And then really the third group is the providers, the people who create the technology for those folks to leverage. And I'll just introduce real quickly who we've got on the phone today, and then I'm going to unmute all of you folks. So we've got two super users. Matt Robbins is a CAD and estimating manager within Allen Edwin Homes. And Don Chesney is a VP of operations within Arbor Homes. And both of these builders are, you know, good size, kind of, I would call them, having been from the Midwest, Midwestern builders, Michigan, Indiana region, that have been doing some cool things to play with and leverage BIM technologies on the business operations side, as well as potentially on the sales and marketing side. So you think traditionally ops and, you know, doing your plans and getting things out in the field, they're also doing some cool things from a marketing and sales aspect as well. The second group of folks includes Tim Beckman, who's a partner and director of business development within CG Visions, and Joe Buysse, who's a director of operations for BIMaire. These are your integrators, the guys who have access to the solutions, some of their own. Tim has been doing this for quite a while, and Joe, interestingly enough, was a super user within Canadian Homes. So he has kind of a dual perspective on that front. And then we also have on the tech side, we have the Director of National Sales for the builder software products within MiTek, Rich Kashian, and we have Sundar, who is a technology consultant who's working with YTWO Formative, which is a web-based, cloud-based BIM solution that's in the process of coming to market. So those are the folks that are going to be chatting with us today. And then this is just kind of the format. We're going to do about 35, 40 minutes of think tank discussion with these folks, running through different topic areas to get some high-level sentiments from them, ideas from them. And then you have the opportunity as a participant to text in during the Q&A portion a question through the chat function in WebEx, or you could unmute yourself and interrupt us gently, if you would, on that front as well, if you wanted to chime in a verbal fashion. So we'll get things kicked off by looking at why is now a good time for BIM. And I'm going to invite for this, I'm going to unmute you, Matt, and I'm going to unmute you, Don, if I can find you in here real quick. Right now, Matt, you're all set to go. So, Matt, can you start things off by giving us kind of a 30,000-foot view of why you at Allen Edwin Homes are doing BIM and what drove that adoption within your business?
Yeah, so we're a production home builder. Right before the recession, we went into production home building, actually grew during the recession. So right now we currently build about 700 homes a year, around 280,000, maintain 50 plans. We have 10,000 line items that we maintain, 1,400 plan-specific options, so that's like great room flooring, but we maintain every assembly for every option. So that 1,400 plans times 50 plans is 70,000 options, plus another 1,200 global options. So our goal for going to a BIM process was, you know, trying to maintain all this. The previous software we were using with all these options and plans, it was difficult that if a door changed, you had to go and touch it in 100 different places. Now with BIM, we have the ability just to go change it in one place, and everything's kind of updated across the board for both in CAD and in estimating for the purchase orders. That's kind of where we are. We implemented probably around 2014. Went from probably about 2.5 drafters at 450 homes a year to 1.5 drafters at 700 a year. And then also we went from probably 4 estimators down to 1.5 estimators. So that's
Okay.
kind of the big overhead view of what we've seen.
Very cool, very cool. Now, Don Chesney is with Arbor Homes, and Don, I'm not sure if you typed in your name when you called in, or if you're on one of these lines. If you're on here, if you can unmute yourself and give us your 30,000-foot view, and then if we don't hear from you in a moment, I'm going to ask your partners in crime to step in on your behalf. So Don, if you're there, if you can unmute yourself, and I'll try unmuting a couple folks that might actually be you, because I don't see you in the queue right this second. Okay. Well, I do not see you there. So if you could jump in, folks from BIMaire, if you wouldn't mind jumping in, I'm going to unmute you. Joe, I'm going to find you in here. Put you on the spot to give a little bit of background on Arbor. And Joe, you're unmuted now. Unless you've muted yourself. Gotta love technology or hate technology at this point. All right, Mike Moran, I'm going to pick on you to see if you can give us any background from your perspective on Arbor, and then if not, we're going to move to the next question. Mike, are you on?
Elizabeth, am I good? It's Joe Buysse.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah.
There we go.
If you can give us
awesome.
30,000-foot views. You were having a little technical problem there. Sorry about that. If you could give us a 30,000-foot view.
Yeah, so I'll try to do Don some justice as far as Arbor Homes is concerned. Midwest builder, 1,000-plus homes a year. They're a little bit different as out of those 1,000 homes that are built, those are built from about 18 different floor plans. So heavily optioned models, all connected through their sales, their ERP system, which is provided by MiTek. So tens of thousands of options on a per plan basis, including not only structurals, but decorator selections, et cetera. So continuing to grow, that portfolio as far as what options are available, how they're implemented, and how they're connected to the sales system overall.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate your jumping in.
Sure.
You're going to be back up in the next section. But we see, what we would think would drive adoption now is that you need to be more and more efficient. Affordability of homes is an issue. Labor is an issue. And yes, there's an investment that's involved here, but that could, if done properly, yield a lot of returns. And we've seen that in some of the other case studies that we've been looking at with, the folks from McCall Homes who spoke at the summit. And there's some more information on that front available for our members on our website as well. But we think this is timely and do appreciate kind of the background on what's going on at Arbor and at Allen Edwin on that front. So if we look then ahead to say, okay, there's value there. Well, what are some of the best practices for getting started? That was one of the big questions that people had. They're like, is there value there? Is it worth the investment? But really, what do you need to do? And Clark Ellis says this. He says it's like a marathon. And you need to condition yourselves in order to get ready to do this kind of implementation so that you're more successful. So what are the kinds of things that you need to do to condition yourself? So I'm going to unmute you, Joe, and I'm going to unmute Tim. And let's see, where did you go? And let one of you guys go. So go ahead, Tim. I think that was you.
Hey, Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
All right. So really what we found is that one of the the key to success is actually having kind of a product owner or project manager or owner that can kind of see the entire landscape and not just, you know, singularly focused on their one department. So in many of these cases, as they adopt, say, BIM, there may be a larger onus or there may be a greater responsibility placed on one department to the benefit of another department, but to the net benefit of the company as a whole. So we found kind of one of the pitfalls is just, you know, assigning it to the head of architecture or just the head of estimating or just the head of construction. Because if they don't necessarily have the entire perspective of how it can have a positive impact on the company as a whole, then oftentimes it's tough to get started. Now, I'll really tip my hat to Matt, you know, up at Allen Edwin, because he had, you know, kind of the ideal balance between understanding how and why it was important for construction documents to be accurate. But he also understood from an estimating and a purchasing and a field communication perspective why all of those things really needed to align. So really kind of looking at it from an interdisciplinary approach and finding a solid mix of leaders from each of those departments and make sure that perspective is thought of before, you know, actually taking the first step.
Cool. Matt, do you have anything to add, since he just led nicely into Allen Edwin? Do you have anything to add on your front from any of these questions that you see on the screen from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, you guys said it right, is it's a marathon. I think our implementation, we spent probably about a year just setting up our CAD and the beginnings of the estimating side. And as you're going through that, you know, the other biggest thing that we had is you have to have buy-in, 100% buy-in from everybody in the country. You know, that's everybody from the associate level all the way up through the owners. For us, it was a pretty heavy expense that the owners had to, you know, commit to and say they were going to do it. But then we also had to navigate, you know, like Tim said, how we purchase materials, what those line items are, how do we change the pricing and change, you know, how we come up with those. The same with CAD too. It's what do we show on our master sets. I mean, some of the stuff you could get there and, you know, just have pages and pages and pages of options, but we actually went back and included some of the options into our base plans and removed options. So I think my biggest thing was making sure you've got buy-in across the board and everybody's flexible and willing to change their day-to-day routines and how they look at things to really implement successfully.
Really quick, Betsy, one last, you know, point on that topic is Matt and the team up there didn't think that just implementing software was going to solve all of their issues. They really looked at it as an opportunity to review the way that they run their business and couple that with a new software opportunity. So Matt mentioned there, again, a new way of doing business with their trade base, a new way of looking at their options. That coupled with the investment in new technology, I think, is what allowed them to really yield the positive results that they've seen.
Perfect. Now, so we heard from Tim at CG, we heard from Matt at Allen Edwin. I'm going to open the floor on the same front to see if you have any inputs, Joe, from BIMaire, but also don't want to neglect the other folks on our panel. So we'll then jump over and open the floor to YTWO Formative and MiTek to see if you guys have anything you want to interject at this point as well. But I'm going to unmute you again, Joe. So if any thoughts on this front, Joe?
Sure. So I agree, and I echo, you know, Tim's comments. You know, the top down understanding and value of that commitment drives that whole process. So having, you know, your CEO level down understand why we're doing this and the value that ultimately it adds to the company, and being able to communicate that downstream is incredibly important in that process, way earlier than ever making a selection around technology or, you know, anything about that. I think, but, you know, part of this conditioning process is getting down to that very low level to understand where are those difficulties that reside today, right? And where are those interdepartment issues that simple changes that could be made from an architecture standpoint, an estimating standpoint, a marketing and sales standpoint, that can, the small little tweaks that have incremental value across each one of those departments, right? And understanding what those are coming into this process allows you then to adjust and manipulate, what those outputs need to be, they're refined, which ultimately gets you to a place where you could produce more with the same amount of people or produce more with, less people overall.
Okay, great input. Thank you, Joe. I'm just going to open the floor then to, I'm unmuting you, Doug Harmon and Sundar with YTWO Formative, as well as Gregg Renner with MiTek. So do you guys have anything you want to interject on this front before we move to the next set of discussion?
Elizabeth? Yeah, this is Gregg Renner. One, I guess, quick comment, maybe it, reinforces what Tim and Joe were both talking about, that, engaging across the disciplines of the business through that process is a really important way to get to the end effectively, and even including the trades in that process so that they also have input and ownership in the outcome. We've seen a couple of cases in which, a project can get sideways in midstream because of that disconnect, and we've seen that as a fundamental way to start it out.
Okay. Thanks, Gregg. Was that Sundar who was trying to interject as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would add on what Gregg has mentioned a while ago, is basically the communication between the different stakeholders in an organization, who does what, in terms of how do you set up a specific project based on current best practices, kind of a discussion. The major challenge which comes in BIM in terms, the only thing which they focus on is the collaboration between the disciplines which we have. So if there is a plan set forward in terms how people could communicate within disciplines, that would be a bit good starting point for this process.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on to the next big question that folks had, which was really related to, and this is my favorite slide, which is really, where the rubber meets the road. So what are the costs in terms of time and people, and what's the return on investment really? I mean, we heard a little bit earlier from, actually why you did it from folks, but if we look at it in this terms and any of these sub-questions, I'm going to start unmuting you guys again so you can chime in. This time I'm going to go to Joe first at BIMaire. So any thoughts on this front, Joe?
I do. So, there's, two different, main buckets. You have your technology cost and then your implementation cost, right? So if we look at those two big buckets, a lot of this comes down to how fast do you want to go, and what's your overall time commitment from your executive level down, right? What's your stomach for, cost before you can actually start, seeing results and understanding what that benefit is. So from a time and money, it's, depending on what that implementation, looks like, it really comes down to a variable of, what are the outputs that we're trying to achieve, and ultimately what are the goals of the builder, right? So if it's simply, we're converting somebody from a 2D set of construction documents to fully interactive, 3D BIM plans with cost estimates, marketing and sales, web presence, that whole process, it comes down to a per plan estimate, right? How many people do you want to put on? We understand how long it takes to take that plan and do that conversion from start to end, but it really comes down to how many plans does the builder have, how many resources do they want to allocate to that, and how fast do they want to go, right? So, you could be talking about millions of dollars within a year, period of time, or you could be talking, hundreds of thousands of dollars over many years. Right, so it really just comes down to how fast do you want to see that change occur, and as that change is occurring, what are the benefits that you're immediately able to attain, right? So the beauty of the whole process is being able to, I think, one, go fast, but you can't go fast until you already have created and completed all the legwork that's up front, right? Going fast in the wrong direction is not going to get you to your final solution, right? So doing that homework up front and understanding there's cost to do that homework and to work through that process is something that's got to be understood, again, from top down. But once you get through that and you're saying, all right, I think we've aligned everything that we need to align, and we know there's, 20% more effort during the process to, refine that, you could get to a place where you understand exactly what that time and cost will be. And it's kind of a vague answer, but it really depends on the builder themselves of what the product is, how many options are involved, and what the end goal is. Are you looking for something like concept to close, where we take it from a design standpoint and bring it all the way through the entire process? Or are you looking to implement little portions and pieces of this that are directly affecting how you buy materials, or how you create your construction documents, or what you do from a marketing standpoint, right? Everyone has their own threshold for, where their pain point is. But ultimately what I'd recommend, and what I do recommend as we're having these conversations, is look at the holistic picture. Where do you want to be in, 5 years, right? And how is technology helping change and mitigate some of those, different risk factors that are out there, and understand that costs money, right? So having the right resources in place is difficult to do, especially when everyone's looking for the same resources. Technology costs dollars, right? So there's incremental cost on top of whatever the software and resource cost is as well, right? So partnering with, integrators like CG Visions and BIMaire, you have opportunities to, get there quicker without having all those other incremental costs, that add to that process.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Joe. I'm going to turn to you now, Matt, as well, and see if you have any thoughts from your perspective as a builder on this front.
As far as the return?
Well, any of it. What if anything that you'd feel comfortable speaking to, ROI, what it cost you to invest in it, was it worth the investment for you? Any feedback you have on that level would be great.
Yeah, I estimated, we jumped right in, all in. We took the path of, let's get it done now. So we were probably pushing near the $1 million mark in 1 year. For us, it was more of the way our systems talked. It's like we had to go all in and flip the switch. So we spent probably about a year getting the 3D CAD ready, and then starting with the estimating side, and then flip the switch. And I'd say it probably took us another year of tweaking the estimating side and making sure everything was dialed in. I'd say probably within the last year or two, we probably finally got everything dialed in. Like I said, we started this, and I think we made the transition in fall of 2014. So it was a couple of years. But, as I noted earlier, we've seen drastic efficiency increases, going from 5 estimators down to 1.5 estimators. And that's even increasing how many homes we build. So, and the same on the drafting side. So our return, we're pretty sure that we've paid for it in efficiency. Our variance is pretty much flatlined. It's not gone down for the estimating side, and it's actually gone down on the CAD side. So we're building 150 more homes, yet we've seen a lower variance on that. So I don't think anyone here has really done any numbers to find out when we paid for everything, but we're quite certain that it's paid off at this point, so it was worth it for us.
Awesome. Well, we've talked about this in terms of on the off-site construction side, in terms of also looking at, what are the impacts on quality and callbacks, and having to bring trades back. If you've got all your systems together, you get efficiency, but are you also saving? And are you also saving in the softer things like brand reputation or warranty costs that maybe as the person doing the estimating and the delivery of the home, you're not part of the builder who's actually looking at that directly, but it would be interesting to look at and see what the implications are on those sides as well. Now, Don, if you're on the phone, from Arbor Homes. Feel free at any time to unmute yourself. And for everybody on the phone, they are doing cool things there. And what we'll do if we don't hear from Don today is we'll just chat with him offline and share some insights on all of these questions from his perspective with you as well, just so you get a couple of different perspectives builder-wise. But I'm going to open the floor to Tim really quickly on this front and to Doug, so that either of you, Doug from Y2 Formative and Tim from CG, if either of you have anything you want to say on this front before we move into the next set of questions.
Thanks,
Tim
Betsy.
or Doug?
This is Tim. I'll go really quick. I'm glad to hear that Joe has a difficult time attributing a specific ROI as well. You know, we always kind of use the, well, how much does it cost to build a house, you know, analogy, and it really does depend upon, you know, what goes into that house. Is it 1 story, is it 2 stories, is it slab on grade, is it full walkout basement, you know, and I think that type of parallel can definitely be used when defining exactly what the BIM strategy is. I think some of the savings, you know, that Matt mentioned, you know, how do you value fewer change orders? How do you value, you know, fewer estimation errors, less plan errors? But also we had a customer, you know, come to us and say, because of this process, we have trades that want to work with us. And I know that the trade shortage is a whole topic for another conversation, but they said that, you know, we are getting the A crews on our job now. They want to work with us because we have, you know, established a technology stack that makes it very easy for the trades to do business with us. So those are some of, you know, again, kind of those anecdotal things where it's tough to put a specific dollar amount on having, you know, the A+ crew on your job site as opposed to the C- crew. But, you know, again, in this type of technology, those are some of the, you know, returns that these builders are seeing.
Great.
Yeah.
Doug, do you have anything you want to jump in on that front, or Don, if that's Don?
Yeah, that was Doug. So yeah, I'll just jump on the end of that comment a little bit there. I mean, I think certainly, you know, the investment really varies depending on the company, right? So, you know, just the BIM implementation is part of the process, but I think others have also made reference to, you know, really just your overall building process and your operating processes. I mean, as you implement something like this that does impact other areas of the company, like estimation, you know, potentially procurement and other follow-on things inside the company, it has a broad impact, right? So certainly we think the investment up front is going to vary by company, really depending on, you know, kind of how big of a chunk you're biting off. But what we see sometimes is companies will say, well, now that we've got a digital model, we want to change the way we're doing estimation, right? And now that we've got a more accurate estimation process, or we're estimating at a lower level of detail, you know, now we want to consider items for national procurement maybe that we weren't doing before, right? So, you know, I think a lot of systems inside companies aren't really ready to handle all those conversations. So sometimes BIM actually introduces some broader conversation inside the company about what other systems are going to be impacted and where that value actually comes from. And from the value side, I mean, you know, we've done studies. You know, I think anecdotally those numbers are still being kind of vetted, but certainly we see impact, you know, across the company, right? So I know the one builder mentioned just specifically, you know, a reduced amount of estimators because you've got a more automated process, right? I mean, that's an easy one, I think, to account for, but we think there's lots more benefits inside companies that will follow on just from better processes and better communication. So.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Okay, so some good input on that front, which kind of leads us nicely into the next one. Who should own the solution? And the reason I think this came up potentially in the conversation. So at the summit we had really part of the day looking at production and productivity in a broader sense, moving from on-site to off-site and starting the conversation looking at building information modeling and saying that no matter which you're doing, on-site construction, off-site construction, it will help you gain efficiencies, it will help you get some return on investment And, you know, the offsite providers were saying that really for many of them, especially if you're doing panelization, it's critical for them to have that level of drawing so that they can use, so that they can deliver on what you're expecting in the field. So then in lies the question, who should own it? Is it the architecture firm? Is it the builder? Is it the offsite provider? Wanted to open that to you guys to see what your thoughts were on that front. And I'm going to start this time with Gregg Renner, and then I'm going to go next to, just so we can mix things up, I'm going to go next to Matt, and then Joe, and then we'll move along the line on that front. So any thoughts on that, Gregg?
Yeah, that's you know, it's an important topic, obviously. I think, you know, what we've seen over the years is that ownership really depends on contribution. In other words, there are a lot of people that contribute to the solution of a home, and each of those people have different amounts of contribution depending on maybe the makeup of that particular builder's business in particular. So what I mean by that is a large builder with an enterprise kind of solution may have a lot of resources in-house, like architects and engineers that make contributions to the structural design or to the trades that are contributing to all that. On the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, you have a builder who maybe builds, you know, 5 or 10 houses a year, and he depends, you know, virtually 100% on his supplier and the trades to bring in their expertise to the solutions. And so I think that, you know, there's not a single answer to who should own the solution. I really think that what we're seeing is that each person that participates has a contribution to that and owns a piece of that solution based on what they've given to it. And so there's, you know, a different mix depending on that combination, I think.
So maybe based on what you're saying, from your perspective, it's more important to have a clear plan as to who's running it, not necessarily who has the keys to the kingdom or their hands on the steering wheel, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you know, ultimately the builder builds the house and he owns that intellectual property of the house and the plan that he builds. Mm-hmm. But I also know that, you know, on the structural side, we have a lot of component manufacturers out there that do an awful lot to contribute to the design of that structure and how that framing would go together. That's sort of their, you know, special sauce, I guess, that they bring to it. Or you have HVAC trades that, you know, make designs that are very efficient in the markets that they serve for all those reasons. And so everybody owns a little piece of it, but I think, you know, the builder obviously has a special place there because he's building the house and he takes that ownership.
Okay. I'm going to jump over to Joe on the same front, then Matt, and then I'll hop over to YTWO Formative to mix things up. So any thoughts, Joe, on this front?
Sure. So, you know, ultimately it's the builder I always see as the overall owner. But from a technology standpoint, from a production standpoint of getting all their parts and pieces in play, we see there's definitely a delineation between, you know, builders building less than 300 homes a year and builders building greater than 300 homes a year. And a lot of that just comes down to resource, understanding of technology, the speed at which technology is changing, the cost of adoption. So, you know, if you're sub 300, you know, we have clients today where they want everything turnkey, right? Where they just want to be able to buy land and build homes, right? And we're more than comfortable supporting that because it basically takes all of that back office need off of the builder, puts it on our shoulders, and we still need to be able to deliver for them. You know, but we can do that with, you know, all the integration of technology and resource and understanding that, you know, we've come to build over the past 10 years. So now, you know, once you're above that 300 number, then we see, you know, there's potentially enough staff in place to handle other parts and pieces of the overall process, but they may still need help in specific areas, right? So ultimately, it's still always the builder because ultimately they're, you know, paying for that whole process. But as far as ownership of, the quality of the product that's being delivered. That's a shared thing. Above 300 for us, and sub 300, it's something where we take full responsibility of that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm just sending a reminder to everybody by text so that if you have any questions, we're going to get to that point soon in the program. Any questions or comments? And then when I go to that screen, I will invite you to unmute yourself as well and jump in and just introduce yourself if you want to say something verbally. But before we do that, I'm going to turn the floor over to, on this front, Doug. And I think Sundar from YTWO Formative, we're going to focus with you next on the integration side. So I'll ask you to respond to some of the next set of questions. So any input from you, Doug? And if not, I also see that Rich Kashian from MiTek just rejoined by cell phone as well. So the question is, who should own the solution? And are there any benefits gained or lost when you're not in control of the solution yourself? So any input from YTWO Formative or from you, Rich, at MiTek on this front before we move on?
This is Doug on the YTWO side. I mean, I think in general, we believe that, ownership from the builder is definitely key in the process. And, I think all of these BIM type solutions look to really help you refine the process over time. And we think that, really owning that is the best way to do that. I mean, all that said, I think the delineation with the number of homes built is important because there are some builders that probably don't have the specialties and people on staff to do that. So I guess I would kind of agree with the past commentator.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Doug. Anything on your front, Rich, before we move on? Okay. All right. Then the last piece, and this is kind of a can of worms, which is what which is a bit of what the graphic indicates. There were some questions about integration and standardization at the summit as well. When you're looking at putting all of these systems together or you're looking at connecting with external parties, are there any collaboration challenges? And I'm going to throw this one back over to Matt for input in a moment, that you're seeing anything that the technology systems could do for you more effectively, or any lessons that you've learned in that area. And then to the integrators and the providers, are there other opportunities that you see on the tech side for greater standardization and integration so that the systems can more effectively talk to each other? So I'm going to turn the floor over to Matt for a moment and unmute you, Matt, and see what your thoughts are on this front.
I think standardization is kind of, it's going to vary by company. I mean, I know the way that we do business is we struggle with a lot of things of the programs that we'll use, and the response usually is best business practices are to do it this way. And we kind of like to follow our own way of what's working really well for us. So I think standardization is really going to be based on the company and how you do business. As far as, the sharing the files and all that, I mean, we just use Dropbox, and we haven't had any issues with that, sharing it with, our lumber company. We've had some talks about sharing our models with them, so to ease their truss and floor joist design, and with any other companies that we're collaborating with for file sharing. But I don't think there really is a standard way to do everything. I think every business is going to be different.
Right. I think for some of the standardization, and when I throw this, thanks for that, Matt. I think for some of the standardization that came up at the summit was actually, I think the manufacturers were looking for a way to standardize maybe the data that they're providing to builders and solution providers, so that it's easier for them to provide the assets that might be used in each of the different systems. So I think there was a bit of that. And we do have some of our manufacturer partners like Panasonic and folks on the line as well today. So feel free, if that's you, if you're thinking that, and texting into us for this part of the discussion, any comments that you have as well. But on this front, I'm going to open it up to you guys, you solution providers and integrators, to see, what are your thoughts in standardization and being able to share perhaps assets, like what happens if a builder has a MiTek system and their offsite provider has a different software solution. How easy is it currently to share between different systems? That's another question that kind of pops up on that front. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Tim first, because we didn't hear from you last time. Then I'm going to go to Sundar from YTWO Formative and Joe from BIMaire to get your comments as well. And then Rich, if you want to chime in at any time from MiTek, that would be great. So any thoughts from your perspective, Tim?
Thanks for queuing that up, Betsy. Yeah, I think from our perspective, oftentimes, it's either in an all or nothing capacity, where there's a lot of times from a data perspective, when you share it all, that there's a lot of noise with, the receiver of that information that they kind of have to, filter through and kind of find the diamonds, in the rough between all of those. So in the past, I think, data interoperability, or the ability to share information from system to system, has been measured on the extremes. It either doesn't do it or it does it 100%, where we think that there's a lot of space in the middle to provide efficiencies in sharing that information. So if we can, scrub the data, or if we can share, say, 80% of the data, then we would consider that a victory, that we got, 80%. So we were able to reduce the amount of input done on the receiving end by 80 points. They still need to, again, kind of pick up that information and fill in the remaining 20%, but that is a, pretty significant, gain to be had. We also think, very similar to kind of the open web protocols that, have evolved in order to exchange information on the web. There's probably some, tendency to go there with BIM. And, the Build Smart Alliance has been a significant contributor to this. And, they've really put a focus on, proper definitions along the IFC format. And although it's not perfect, and it doesn't support every object, and it doesn't support every object's native properties that have been assigned within, the native systems, it does provide kind of an initial framework for us to collaborate around. So again, being able to take the 50% gain and work on the remaining 50% gain is something that I think, as we're kind of pioneering this new space, we should, embrace that ability to collaborate amongst, some of the other construction leaders that are willing to accept partial information and see what they can use to improve the overall process.
Thank you, Tim. And Rich just texted me, Rich from MiTek. He's having a little technical difficulties with the phone app, I guess. He's trying to speak, but we can't hear him, so we're chuckling a little bit. I'll chat with him offline. I'm sure he has a lot of good insights. He's tried a few times, and we'll make sure that we share that information with you as well in the follow-up. But that being said, I'm going to open the floor then to Sundar from YTWO Formative, and then Gregg Renner. If you have any thoughts, Gregg, I know this might be a little out of your area of expertise for MiTek, but I'm going to open the floor first to Sundar. So any thoughts from YTWO Formative's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the way our platform speaks with any of the intelligent BIM models coming in is we consume the models as is, adding in more properties to it, but as the previous speaker spoke about, is a common file platform which could speak in terms when we have what if a customer has a specific BIM software and the other one and the receiver has a different version of it. There's more of those building smart kind of a platforms which we could use in, which is definitely not the 100% format which we would be using in, but with the capacity what we have within our platform to be able to add more information to those 50% or 60% models which we bring in from a different file format, we are now able to add in more attribute information. When I say attribute information, more of construction attribute information which could be consumed within our YTWO platform for doing more accurate estimates from there on. So definitely there is a lot of room for those kind of a file format which could speak between different BIM softwares. But ideally, when it comes into the end result for the construction side part of it, where we do more of, where we do the estimates and takeoff from there, a common language, more of these building smart kind of platforms would be an option to use within our platforms too. And I mean, not just confining or just related to one specific BIM software. I mean, we have products across the market which could still consume those models from one version to the other. So, I mean, there is definitely scope for that, but the challenge which was in the past, like 5 years ago, it's now reduced in terms of collaboration, because the way the file exchange formats have changed has been phenomenal.
Great. Well, thank you for that input, Sundar. And then if you do have any input, let me see, where'd you go? Keep sliding around on the screen on me. Greg, if you have any input from MiTek, great. If not, we do have a question, a scenario that came in to us from one of the builders on the phone. Any thoughts, Greg, before we move to that scenario?
Yeah, I'll make a quick attempt there. I got a little bit of text from Rich, so I'm kind of speaking for Rich on this one, and probably not, I hope I handle it well, but, you know, his thought about it is that it's just important for each piece of the BIM to be shared. Each piece that is shared should be outlined first, and make sure that, you know, people begin with a pilot plan, with one plan, and map out the data integrations from that plan. And by doing that, you know, it saves a lot of the disconnects that would happen after that, especially as they're approaching, as a builder approaching the production of conversions of plans to BIM. And by, you know, identifying those kind of key areas and those metrics and preserving those through the process, then you're able to better assess the real ROI that a builder gains from the process. So it maybe ties back into the ROI question a little bit more.
Okay. Well, thank you for being Rich's voice for a moment. Appreciate that. All right. All right. So the question that we had that came in, and we don't have a lot of questions by text right now, and that's okay. If you do come up with something that you want to ask us, feel free to send it to us, and we'll, afterwards, after the call, send it to Natalie. You'll get her email information on our team. She's our engagement manager. And then if there are any follow-up questions that we need to suss out for you, we can do that in some upcoming content. But the one question that did come in was, are there any companies doing preliminary pricing of the design phase using BIM? If not, how would you approach that? And to clarify that question, this person says, for example, they're designing a house with a sunroom at the rear. They would like to find the cost savings for removing the sunroom using BIM. So given that, I'm just going to pose that question to Tim and to Joe, and then Matt, if you've done anything like that, feel free to chime in on that front as well. But Joe, you're live right now if you have any input on that front.
Sure. So, I mean, that's something that's handled on a daily basis. Having a template and an understanding of a specific builder or specific region or marketplace, you know, allows you to conceptually design that house in a very short amount of time, 3-4 hours, get the house modeled and understood. Because of that, and basically understanding different regional locations and differences, and having estimating staff, within the company, with inside BIMaire, we have the ability to go through and do those what-if scenarios very early on in the design process. So not only seeing it from, simply, adding a sunroom, not adding a sunroom, but taking it all the way down to even a structural element side of, what kind of header do you want, carrying load? Do you want to change the roof, assembly, and which way that's going to, affect the overall plan? And really get into those what-if scenarios to not only, optimize the design, but even value engineer to understand what that is. And partnering with someone, being able to do that in a real-time environment, jumping on a quick web call and going through those what-if scenarios together, provides that immediate insight and benefit. We do that with, several clients today across the country that, just allow us to, not only understand their business process and their costing and, purchasing methodologies, but it also allows us to then, help build out what their BIM template needs to be. So, we starting in the design aspect and then eventually carrying that through the entire process, ultimately provides, value add, reduction in cost overall and cycle time. So there's a lot of benefit there as well.
Great, thanks, Joe. And I'm going to flip the switch to Tim and then Matt, and then we're going to wrap up for today, and I have a couple more things to share with you before we get off the phone, but any thoughts on that front, Tim?
Yeah, I would say, let's get the individual who asked this question in touch with Brad McCall, because that's, precisely what they're doing. I mean, I think he mentioned that they can go from a design charrette to a cost analysis in about a day. And again, they're creating the model, and they don't have to go through the creation of all the construction documents and sending those out for bid and then getting those numbers back. They can essentially, as Joe stated, generate that cost immediately. And then once you get down into the unitized measurements of, how much is it per square of siding, how much is it per linear foot of tie-back tape, and when you're backing out a window or a door or a slider and you're replacing it with a sunroom that may have the same slider just in a different location, but it's in a 2x6 or 2x4 wall instead of a 2x6 wall, the BIM will capture all of those, deltas. And when you can align those deltas with the cost of those specific items, very quickly you can understand what is the cost to construct impact in either a positive or negative way when you add that, rear sunroom. So that is being done, daily. And Joe, I think, both of our companies, that's kind of standard protocol. I mean, we've been doing that for years.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Tim. If anyone has any other questions from the floor, please type them in now. I'm going to open Matt's mic to see if you have any input, and then I'll double check before we share some final thoughts for you today. So anything to add to that, Matt, from your perspective at Allen Edwin?
Yeah, I mean, those guys pretty much nailed it on the head. We're doing that every day too. We'll, when we're starting to develop a new plan, we'll draw it up, throw it in there, and price it. That's another thing where the return on the investment comes in, rather than spending a few days drawing it and getting it to a point where the estimator can go do a takeoff. All we have to do is get a model put together. It doesn't have to be noted. It doesn't have to be dimensioned or anything. Dump it in and hit the button, and a couple seconds we have a price for it. So we utilize that quite frequently and efficiently. So the time to do it has also decreased quite a bit. Perfect.
Thanks so much, Matt. And I'm going to check and see if there are any other questions that came in. As I said, if you had a question or a thought or an idea, or even if you're a presenter on today and there was something you really wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to, when we send you the follow-up materials, you'll get that from Natalie, and anything else you want to add, feel free to do so at that time or ask. We didn't have any other questions that came in, but that's okay. This is just the beginning of kind of this conversation. If you are a member or partner in the Alliance, we have a members-only section of the website that Tim mentioned, Brad McCall. We'll be launching this is kind of what it looks like. Each one of those squares represents a content area. We've got a BIM content area that we're going to be launching in the next couple of days that will have access to Brad's presentation and some other presentations from the summit earlier this year, but you could listen to what he has to say on that front through this section of the website. We've got some case studies in here as well. We've done direct Q&As with a number of folks, including on the subject, including Clark Ellis, all of the provider and enabler companies that you've heard from today on the phone, as well as a couple of builders who aren't on the phone today presenting. And then Charlie Wardell has been on the line kind of listening in. He's part of our content team. He's been doing a lot of those interviews for us, and he is working with me on a bit of a roadmap, kind of a 1.0 version. So you'll be looking for that soon, and that's something that will be available only to our members and partners to take a look at. Rachel Kelly is sitting here next to me. She's our other executive director, and she's going to reach out to you if you aren't currently participating to see if you're interested in getting engaged with us after today's call as well. And then just wanted to share some upcoming cool things that we're doing. We've got another call like this, which we call a virtual roundtable toward the end of September. Margaret Whalen from Whalen Advisory Group, great financial expert, is helping us lead the charge in this area for both the web version and the live roundtable that we're doing. Alan Lang from Lang & Associates, used to be with Taylor Morrison, is participating here as well. We've got a couple of bigger builders that we're working on securing that hopefully we'll know about in the next week or so. But we're going to do kind of this type of discussion online the 20th, and then we've got a one-day deep dive session with mini think tank roundtable discussions and some tee-up presentations planned for Baltimore in November and the 15th. And the registration is going to go live for that in the next couple of days, so look for email with more information on that front. If you are a member or partner, you can also join us in Knoxville the beginning of October. Michael Dickens is sitting in the room with me from Ibicus. He's our vice chair. He and I are talking about the future of home building at the NAHB Building Systems Summit. So that's very much focused on off-site construction. That's the 30th through the 2nd in the morning of October. I think Margaret's presenting there as well. But we're going to be there already, and we're going to be going to look at Clayton Homes Factory and talk to their folks on the manufacturing side. Goodall Homes, who is Professional Builder of the Year in 2014. So they do a lot of great stuff from a quality perspective and management perspective. And then this funky image that you see here is a 3D printed piece of the house. So we're also going to Branch Technology to get some live demonstrations from them, and that's for members only. And then look ahead to April of next year. That's our next summit. So you get all of this information sent to you by email, but just want to get it in your minds as we move forward. Thanks for participating today and for humoring me, because we are 2 minutes over, so I appreciate that. But have a great rest of your day and look for follow-up materials from today's session. And thanks again to all of our presenters and our partners for supporting what we do. So we'll look forward to talking to you guys again soon.
Hey, thanks a lot, Betsy. Appreciate you putting this on.
Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you.